Is it possible that Trump, or any other president for that matter, could actually eliminate the income tax? No, it is not. Well, that was fast. We done here? Just kidding. It is a little bit more nuanced than that. But before we discuss the likelihood and the problems with attempting to eliminate the US income tax, we have to see where it started in the first place. If we rewind the clock and go all the way back to the beginning of the United States of America, you can fast forward through the entire history of America until 1913 before you get to the income tax. The one caveat in there is for the US Civil War. An income tax was instituted in order to pay for the war, and it was ended shortly after because there were constitutional problems with it. Yes, you heard me right. There were constitutional problems with the income tax, and in fact, those constitutional problems still exist today. One problem is the fact that the Constitution itself does not define what income is, and newsflash, neither does anywhere in the Internal Revenue Code. There are, however, 3 Supreme Court cases that have defined what income is, and in all 3 of those cases, income is defined as business profits. So even after the 16th Amendment was passed, you still have the issue of individuals being taxed on their own income may not actually be legal. But we don't live in a land of rule of law. We live in a land of rule of man, which means that when somebody comes and knocks on your door with a gun and says, I'm going to put you in jail unless you give me money, well, you give them money. The other thing you'll notice about the income tax that was started in 1913 was that it was started for only the top 1% of income earners, and it was only supposed to be 1% of their income. It was passed the way any new tax or any new law for that matter is passed, with the people in power saying, hey everybody, I'm on your side and we're gonna just go after the bad guys here. But as soon as they get their foot in the door and get that power, they roll it out and steamroll everybody. Whether you're looking at the Patriot Act or whether you're looking at the income tax, it's the same. Give me some power for your own good and then I'm gonna use it against you. So we get to the situation today where most people spend the vast majority of their year working just to save up enough money to pay the tax man, which means about half of your money goes to Uncle Sam every year. The other thing you'll notice is that all tax laws are decided by Congress, not the president, because laws are legislation and Congress is the one in control of legislation, not the president, who is in charge of the executive branch of the government. Now, putting all of that aside, let's talk about the logistics of actually getting rid of the income tax. We understand that the government funds itself from 3 main sources. The first one of those is taxes. Now we can see a breakdown here of where taxes come from for the US government. We can see that the vast majority of tax income, just a little over 50%, comes from individual income taxes. So right off the bat, we have a problem that if you eliminate the individual income tax, then you cut the US government's funding in half. But it doesn't stop there, because technically Social Security and Medicare taxes are individual income taxes as well, because they just get taken out of your paycheck. We also have corporate income taxes, which is a tax on profits for corporations, excise taxes, miscellaneous taxes, customs duties, and estate and gift taxes. But obviously the vast majority of the tax money the government takes is coming from your paycheck. But there is a second way that the US government gets income, and that is because once they have burned through all of your tax money, they still spend more than that every year. The only way to do that is through borrowing. So borrowing is the second source of US government income. If you want to know how much the US government is borrowing, you have to look at the number called the deficit. The deficit is the difference between what they take in taxes and what they spend. So far this fiscal year to date, they have borrowed $1.26 trillion. So if income taxes were to be eliminated tomorrow, the very first thing that would happen is borrowing would make up the difference. Now, currently the US government can borrow for 10 years at a rate of 4.2%. But if they had to borrow an extra $2-3 trillion this year as a result of losing individual income taxes, they would have to borrow a lot more, which would mean interest rates would go up. Not to mention the fact the only reason anybody, an institution, a government, or a person is willing to loan the money to the government is because they know at the end of the day, the government gets money they need to pay them back through taxes. And so if you eliminate that source of income for the US government, well, then people are probably going to demand, at least in the short term, a higher interest rate in order to lend that money to the government. So eliminating individual income taxes would mean the US government would borrow more, which would mean they'd have to pay higher interest, and they'd have to pay higher interest from people demanding more interest because the source of their income has dried up, which presents risk in the borrowers, in the lenders not getting their money back. That brings us to the third way that the US government gets income, and that is through the power of the money printer, the Federal Reserve. This is a chart of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which currently is worth about $7.2 trillion. And a big chunk of that is US government treasuries, which means Federal Reserve has printed money, bought US treasuries from the open market, which represents new dollars that are making their way into the hands of the US government for them to spend. It is indirect, but that is the net effect. We can speculate, although we can't know for sure, that if the individual income tax was to be eliminated and the government would then have to borrow more in order to pay for that lost income, they would have to do this by borrowing from the Federal Reserve because there wouldn't be enough money to borrow from all the other lenders. They wouldn't be able to afford the higher interest rates, and so printing would make up the difference. So what are the problems with the borrowing increasing and with printing increasing? Well, number one, with just borrowing increasing, the interest is actually an issue. Already at current interest rates, the government is already spending well over $1 trillion just on interest alone every single year, which means within the course of just a couple of years, it could get to the point where the government was borrowing $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $4 trillion, $5 trillion, $10 trillion every single year just to pay interest on the debt. That's a debt death spiral. It's a sovereign debt crisis. Obviously, it wouldn't get that far, which would mean they would cover it up with the printing. Now, the printing is a problem because number one, printing is involuntary. With taxes, people see it come out of their paychecks, so they know the pain of the politician who's choosing to do that. With borrowing, it's voluntary, so somebody decides to loan money to the government. However, when they print money, that means that the total money supply increases, which means every single dollar in existence gets diluted. Purchasing power, in other words, gets transferred from all existing money to the new money that just got printed. In other words, prices go higher. This is literally a tax on the poor because when prices go higher, it hurts the people who have a little bit of savings and who can barely afford their current cost of living. And it helps people who have assets and could care less if prices go up. So printing money is a direct wealth transfer from individuals, specifically poor, to the state, and it benefits an increase in wealth for the wealthy. Now, I know what you're thinking here. This is all assuming that there would be no increase in overall net wealth and productivity from the individual income tax being eliminated. It's also assuming that they would not do any spending cuts, that they would just continue to spend as much money as they're spending and pull it from other sources. So let's address that second one first. Absolutely, this whole time I have been assuming that if the individual income tax was eliminated or even drastically reduced, it would not result in any less spending by the government. And the reason is because the person who is most likely to try and eliminate an income tax is President Trump. And if he does get elected again, we can assume he's going to do some similar things like he did last time, which was reduce taxes, but guess what? He still spent way more. This is a chart of the US government's surplus or deficit. When the blue line is above the black line, that means the government runs a surplus. They're taking more in taxes than they're spending. You can see the US government almost always runs a deficit. But following the election of President Trump, the deficit got worse and worse and worse every year. And that's not even counting the big, huge deficit that happened in 2020 after all the COVID spending. Essentially, yes, underneath Trump, taxes were reduced, but spending went up regardless, which means the difference was made up by just borrowing. And so no, I do not think it is very likely to say that if we were to see an elimination even of the US income tax, that we would see a reduction in government spending. I think they would do their best to try and have their cake and eat it too, regardless of the long-term consequences. And if we want to know the reason why, we just have to look at where most government spending money goes. 22% of the US government's budget goes to Social Security. 14% of it goes to the interest on the debt. 13% of it goes to healthcare spending. 13% goes to national defense. And 13% goes to Medicare, which, yes, it is different than healthcare spending. And then finally, 10% of it goes to income security. If we take Social Security plus the interest, plus health, plus Medicare, plus income security, we are looking at 72% of the spending, which is already more than the entire amount that they take from income taxes. And every single one of those categories is political suicide to try and reduce the spending of, let alone eliminate the spending on. Now, what about the other assumption that I made? That productivity and net wealth creation would stay the same with no income tax. Now, if your income tax was eliminated, you would probably have 40% of your money back at least. So if you make 100 grand in a year, you're left over with 60,000. Imagine what you would be able to do with an extra $40,000 per year, an extra almost $4,000 every single month. You could save, you could pay off that debt, you could invest, you could afford to fix those things that you need to fix. You could afford to splurge a little bit and live a little bit larger. And every single person would feel like they were in this same exact boat. Now, if that income tax was eliminated along with spending cuts from the government, then yes, it would absolutely result in a net increase in overall wealth. Business opportunities would explode. People would have savings, people would get rid of debt, people would invest, there would be capital to distribute that would not be going to the government, it'd be used for productive enterprises. We would have an unbelievable explosion of growth that would last however long we wanted it to. However, it would not happen this way if they just replaced that income tax with inflation. If they print the money to make up the difference through borrowing from the Federal Reserve, essentially they're still stealing that purchasing power from people anyway. It just won't show up as a dollar amount in your paycheck. It'll show up as a dollar amount on your grocery store bill going up. Rents and gas and insurance and everything that you've been feeling the pain in recently, that's been squeezing you, that's been leaving you with more month at the end of your paycheck. That would get worse and worse. So yes, your paycheck would get bigger, but your expenses would get bigger even faster. So unfortunately, even though it is unlikely that the income tax would be eliminated, even if it does happen, it is even more unlikely that it would result in more wealth for you, even if it resulted in a larger paycheck. The things the government spends money on are increasing exponentially, and it's political suicide for anybody to do anything smart about it, which means we are in a time period where we should expect for the long-term future to see higher inflation, higher prices, higher interest rates, and extreme volatility in asset prices. And if you're looking for a way to profit from this situation and others like it, I want you to save a date on your calendar, August 15th, 7 p.m. Eastern time. That's because I'm going to be hosting a live masterclass where I'm going to cover one of the best kept secrets in all of finance, the asymmetric trade. These types of trades have been used for years by some of the brightest minds in finance. People like Big Short investor Michael Burry, Black Swan author Nassim Taleb, and hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman. I've personally used this strategy to bring home massive returns in my own account over the past year. And I've also been beta testing this with a small group of members of Heresy Financial University, and they've been using this to profit as well. I plan on revealing everything I know on this live call. We're going to cover things like why I believe the next 3 months will present several massive opportunities for asymmetric trades, and why I believe if you want to profit from them, you have to get into position for them now. Number 2, we're going to cover a simple and easy to understand protocol that I have used to take home big returns in my own portfolio. Number 2, we're going to cover a simple and easy to understand protocol that I use for spotting these asymmetric trades, how I've used it to take home big returns in my own account, and how you can use this protocol to spot asymmetric trades for yourself. Number 3, I'm going to show you the exact techniques that I've been using and teaching to my small group of beta testers to spot some of their own asymmetric trades over the last few months, and how you can use asymmetric trades to profit from major geopolitical events. This event is completely free, but spots are limited, and last time I held one of these asymmetric trading masterclasses, more people actually registered for the event than could fit on the Zoom call. So spots are limited. If you want to reserve your spot, you need to sign up now. Make sure you show up early. And all you have to do is click on the link in the description below, put in your email, and I'll see you there. As always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.